It's only 21 miles wide, but it controls 1/5 of the world's oil supply. A single disruption here could send global markets into chaos, and only one country has the power to pull that trigger. This is the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran holds it like a loaded gun. Every day, over 20 million barrels of oil pass through this narrow corridor. That's more than $1.5 billion per day, sailing through one of the most volatile regions on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is no ordinary waterway. It's a financial artery for the global economy, and any attempt to block it would choke the world. And the threat alone has been enough to rattle oil markets, increase insurance costs, draw naval fleets from global superpowers, and drive billions into defense contracts. This isn't just geopolitics. This is economic warfare, executed through geography, strategy, and silent power. Welcome to Iran's secret weapon, how a tiny strait controls trillions in oil. Welcome to Empire's Secrets. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just a waterway, it's the spine of global energy, and everyone from Wall Street to Beijing is holding their breath. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is just 21 miles wide, barely enough room for tankers to pass in both directions. Yet through this fragile passage flows nearly 30% of all global seaborne oil, and about 1/5 of the total global oil supply. This includes crude from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, and of course, Iran itself. Every ship that passes through carries not just fuel, but economic stability. If this artery is blocked, oil prices could double overnight, shaking markets from London to Lagos. That's not just a theory, it's happened before. Even small tensions have triggered panic. Take July 2018. Iran threatened to block the strait in retaliation for the US sanctions. No shots were fired, but oil prices surged within 24 hours. Insurance premiums for shipping companies spiked, and military vessels were scrambled just to keep the peace. That's the invisible cost of the strait: fear pricing. Behind every barrel that passes through Hormuz is a silent calculation. Traders in New York bet on oil futures. Gulf states race to diversify their shipping. Superpowers build up naval bases in nearby Bahrain, Oman, and the UAE. Not because they want to, but because they have no choice. If the Suez Canal is the shortcut to Europe, the Strait of Hormuz is the world's oil lifeline. And there's one country that sits at the edge of this lifeline, quietly watching, waiting, and calculating every move. Next, we dive into how Iran became the gatekeeper of the global oil empire. Iran wouldn't need nuclear weapons to shake the world. It already holds the oil economy hostage with a single geographic advantage. Iran's southern coastline hugs the northern edge of the Strait of Hormuz. Its military bases, ports, and missile batteries are all strategically positioned to monitor, control, and, if necessary, shut down the passage. This isn't just convenient geography, it's engineered leverage. For decades, Iran has invested in asymmetrical warfare: fast attack boats, naval mines, underwater drones, and anti-ship missile systems, all designed to overwhelm larger, more expensive Western fleets. While the US Navy may dominate open waters, Hormuz is Iran's home turf. The narrow strait limits maneuverability, giving Iran a tactical edge in any potential confrontation. But Iran doesn't need to actually close the strait, it just needs to threaten to. Each time international tensions rise, whether it's sanctions, nuclear deals, or proxy conflicts, Iran signals that the strait could be at risk. It's not a declaration of war, it's a reminder we control the valve. In 2012, during a peak in sanctions pressure, Iran's top naval commander declared, "Closing the strait is easier than drinking a glass of water." That one statement triggered a wave of global panic. Oil futures soared, defense budgets ballooned, diplomats scrambled. Iran had spoken, and markets obeyed. This tactic has a name: strategic ambiguity. Iran never confirms its intentions, but never denies them either, and that ambiguity is worth billions. Behind every political negotiation, there's an unspoken equation. Iran doesn't walk into the room with just ideology, it walks in with a silent trillion-dollar hostage. Now let's explore how this invisible threat affects the private sector, where corporations hedge, insure, and adapt to survive this perpetual uncertainty. For oil companies, the Strait of Hormuz is the most profitable risk they'll ever take, and the most expensive mistake they can't afford. Every major oil corporation, from Saudi Aramco to ExxonMobil, Shell, Total Energies, and PetroChina, depends on the uninterrupted flow of crude through this fragile corridor. But none of them can guarantee it, so they turn to the only thing more powerful than politics: money. Behind every shipment, there's a wall of financial protection. Marine insurance premiums for vessels crossing the strait often double or triple when tensions rise. During the 2019 tanker attacks, insurers added war risk surcharges that reached over $500,000 per voyage just to cover a few days at sea. And yet, they keep shipping. Because the Strait of Hormuz may be dangerous, but it's also unavoidable. Alternate pipeline routes through Saudi Arabia or the UAE exist, but they can't handle even half the daily flow that Hormuz carries. The world built its energy infrastructure around this one fragile lane, and now it's trapped in its own dependency. Oil traders know this, and they use it like a stock market trigger. A single Iranian naval drill? That's good for oil prices. A missile test? That's an excuse to bid up the market. An American destroyer docks in Bahrain? Time to hedge again. And these aren't theoretical moves. Hedge funds, sovereign wealth portfolios, and state-run oil giants all run models that account for Hormuz-specific volatility. There's even a nickname in trading circles: the Strait Premium. It's the price you pay for living in a world where Iran might blink and take the global economy with it. What's more shocking? That Iran knows this and plays it perfectly, or that the oil industry, for all its power, has quietly accepted it. But oil isn't the only sector affected. Let's now look at how entire governments and their militaries have been forced to build a global defense industry around this one strip of water. It's just a strip of water, but for the US and its Gulf allies, protecting the Strait of Hormuz is a trillion-dollar obsession. Ever since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the United States has viewed the Strait of Hormuz as a red line. Not because of ideology, but because of oil. From that moment on, Hormuz was no longer just a strategic passage. It became a battlefield of economic protectionism, guarded by the most expensive military apparatus on Earth. The US Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, was established primarily to patrol the Persian Gulf. Its aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, and surveillance aircraft are deployed to ensure freedom of navigation. But everyone knows what they're really there for: oil flow insurance. And the cost? Over $81 billion per year in direct defense spending across the Gulf. And that doesn't include the tens of billions in arms sales to Gulf monarchies like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. These states now operate American-made fighter jets, missile systems, drones, and naval fleets, all purchased not for regional dominance, but for one shared goal: keeping Hormuz open. Even oil infrastructure on land is militarized. Refineries, pipelines, and export terminals across the region are equipped with anti-drone systems, fortified fences, and private security firms, all funded by petrostates terrified of a single disruption. And yet, none of this guarantees peace. Because in asymmetric warfare, a $2,000 sea mine can stop a $2 billion oil tanker. And Iran knows it. In fact, many of Iran's most provocative moves, like the 2019 seizure of a British tanker or drone strikes claimed by regional proxies, aren't direct attacks. They're messages. calculated reminders that no amount of spending can neutralize proximity. This arms race doesn't end, it escalates, because the price of doing nothing is economic collapse. And so, while Western media debates ideology and diplomacy, behind the scenes there's a cold, oil-fueled truth. Iran may be sanctioned, but it controls the strait. And that gives it something no military can buy: leverage. Next, we go into the shadows of that leverage, where the real front line is not in open war, but in grey areas of sabotage and uncertainty. In the Strait of Hormuz, war doesn't begin with a missile. It begins with a message, and the world listens. The waters around Hormuz have seen more unclaimed attacks, mysterious explosions, and hijacked tankers than almost any shipping lane in the world. But these aren't acts of open war, they're strategic performances, carefully calibrated acts of tension that never cross the line into full-scale conflict, but still send oil prices spiraling. In May and June of 2019, 6 tankers were attacked just outside the strait. No group officially took responsibility. No war was declared, but the impact? Immediate. Oil prices surged. Lloyd's of London raised war risk insurance premiums by over 300%, and global shipping companies rerouted or suspended routes, costing them millions per day. 1 month later, Iran seized the British-flagged Stena Impero tanker, accusing it of violating international maritime law. The ship was held for weeks. The UK responded by increasing its naval presence in the region. But again, no shots were exchanged. This is what military strategists call the grey zone, actions that are aggressive, destabilizing and deeply impactful, yet deliberately fall short of war. And in this grey zone, Iran thrives. Its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, or IRGCN, operates fast boats that swarm larger vessels. Its network of radar stations and drones creates a real-time map of the strait, and its arsenal of anti-ship missiles, many hidden in underground silos, ensures that every oil tanker in the area knows you're being watched. But here's the genius. Every threat is plausibly deniable. Every incident is just ambiguous enough to avoid a global military response. And every delay or disruption becomes a billion-dollar ripple through shipping, energy, and finance. It's economic attrition, not in months or years, but in headlines, future contracts, and panic-triggered algorithms. For Iran, this isn't just defense, it's diplomacy by disruption. And it's earned them a seat at global negotiating tables they were once locked out of. But how exactly does Iran translate this tactical chaos into political and economic power? Let's go deeper in. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper that moves markets, halts tankers, and forces world powers to the table without a single bullet fired. Iran understands something the West still struggles to admit. Influence doesn't require dominance, it requires relevance. And thanks to the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is always relevant. Even as sanctions have crippled much of its economy, Iran has used its control of Hormuz as a permanent bargaining chip. One it doesn't have to cash in, only threaten to. This has allowed Iran to negotiate from a position of strength, even while under economic siege. In nuclear talks, Hormuz becomes a silent partner in the room. In oil pricing, it becomes the invisible hand behind OPEC's strategies. And in US foreign policy, it remains the ever-present risk that restrains military options. Because the truth is, no Western leader wants to see what happens if Hormuz is actually closed. Military strategists have run simulations. A full blockade would instantly remove 20 million barrels per day from the market. Global oil prices could spike to $200 per barrel or more within days. Strategic reserves would begin depleting. Inflation would soar. Developing countries would collapse under fuel costs. And who gets blamed? Not the oil companies, not OPEC, the West, for provoking the crisis. That's Iran's shield. Even its most aggressive posturing often goes unchecked. because the economic cost of confrontation outweighs the political benefit of retaliation. Iran has turned its geography into a form of immunity, not absolute, but powerful enough to resist regime change, military strikes, and even full-blown embargoes. Meanwhile, Western corporations continue to quietly comply, ensuring shipments at higher rates, hedging their portfolios and lobbying their governments for diplomacy, not because they agree with Iran, but because they depend on Hormuz. And while the world looks towards de-escalation, Iran tightens its grip, with new naval exercises, closer partnerships with China, and investments in missile technology tailored for that single stretch of sea. This is what real leverage looks like. Not chaos, but control. Not war, but the credible threat of it. A trillion-dollar power move disguised as a shipping lane. But as the world slowly shifts away from oil and toward alternative energy, the big question emerges: can Iran's secret weapons still hold in a post-oil future? What happens when the world no longer runs on oil, but the Strait of Hormuz still controls the flow of energy, fear, and power? On paper, the future looks promising. Nations are racing towards green energy, electric vehicles are reshaping the auto industry, and some of the world's largest economies are pledging to go net zero by 2050. That should, in theory, reduce the global dependence on oil, and by extension, weaken the stranglehold of the Strait of Hormuz. But reality is slower than ambition. In 2025, oil still fuels over 80% of global transportation, powers entire economies, and anchors the geopolitical strategy of major powers from Washington to Riyadh. Even under the most optimistic climate scenarios, fossil fuel demand will remain significant for decades, especially in developing nations that rely on cheap energy to grow. And the Gulf region knows this. Instead of fearing the shift, countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are diversifying fast, investing in hydrogen, building pipeline corridors that bypass Hormuz, and creating sovereign wealth funds to future-proof their influence. Iran, meanwhile, is playing a different game. It's deepening ties with China through the 25-year cooperation agreement, which includes major infrastructure and energy investments. It's also strengthening trade with India and Russia and building out its ports like Chabahar to offer alternatives that bypass Western-dominated routes. But here's the truth: even in a green future, the logistics of global trade still depend on choke points. Oil may lose power, but strategic control over maritime routes never does. Whether it's natural gas, refined petrochemicals, or even rare earth minerals for green tech, the ships will keep coming, and Hormuz will still be there, narrow, tense, and quietly weaponized. Iran is betting that as long as it owns the geography, it'll never lose its leverage. And unless the world redesigns its energy routes and maritime supply chains from scratch, a nearly impossible feat, that bet may just pay off. Because in the end, it's not just about the oil, it's about control. And the Strait of Hormuz, even in silence, will speak louder than most armies. It doesn't look like a battlefield. No craters, no sirens, no smoke in the sky. Just water. Calm, narrow, unassuming. But beneath that surface, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Not because of what's happening today, but because of what could happen tomorrow. And that's the point. Iran has built a shadow empire. Not with skyscrapers or satellites, but with geographic pressure and strategic ambiguity. It holds no global currency, it commands no Silicon Valley, but with this one stretch of water, it can trigger recessions, distort diplomacy, and make billion-dollar corporations hesitate, all without firing a single missile. This is economic warfare without a headline. This is energy dominance without a pipeline. This is how modern empires are built, not through conquest, but through control of the flow. And if the world wants to avoid collapse, it must negotiate, not with weapons, but with respect for the unspoken reality. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is a bottleneck. If you found this story eye-opening, you haven't seen anything yet. Subscribe now for more deep dives into the hidden empires shaping our world. from oil and algorithms to ports and power plays. Your desire, your empire.